It was a typical Friday evening at the Johnson household. Barbara and Michael had just finished a long week, and their fridge was in need of restocking. Their energetic daughter Emma was more than ready to get out of the house. "All right, everyone, let's make this a quick trip. Grab a cart and let's go," said Michael with a tired sigh. Barbara tossed a few reusable bags into the cart as Emma eagerly pushed from behind. She was delighted by even the simple act of grocery shopping after being cooped up inside all week. The man trailed them all the way to the register, standing much too close in the short queue. Michael angled their cart to block his view of Emma, shooting him a warning glance. But the stranger merely smiled more, clearly enjoying their distress. As they unloaded items onto the belt, Barbara noticed him leaning over to peer inside. "Need any help bagging, beautiful?" he asked in a gravelly rasp. She shivered and pulled Emma protectively against her side. "No, thank you. We're fine," Barbara answered firmly, while silently cursing the single open register. The cashier rang up their groceries as quickly as possible, oblivious to the tension. But when Michael pulled out his wallet, the man leaned over suddenly. "Oh, let me help with that. I'm good friends with the manager. He'll take care of it," he exclaimed a bit too loudly. Michael stared him down. "That's not necessary, thanks." Bagging finished, they wheeled toward the exit with renewed haste. But their stalker shadowed them step for step, continuing his unnerving litany. "Looks like you could use a hand getting these bags to the car. I've got bigger muscles for heavy lifting, if you know what I mean." His leer sent a fresh wave of revulsion through Barbara. Michael paused, turning to face the man squarely with controlled anger. "Leave us alone. We don't know you, and we don't want your help." The stranger's smile faded, replaced by a flare of something unpredictable in his dark eyes. For a tense moment, it seemed a violent outburst might erupt. Then he simply chuckled deep in his throat and sauntered away, swinging his arms like nothing was amiss. They rushed out to their minivan as fast as heavily laden bags allowed, double-checking it was safely locked once inside. But through the tinted windows, they spotted the man lingering near the exit, still watching with avid interest. Barbara turned the key with shaking hands as Michael pulled Emma into the back seat, buckling her trembling form protectively. Roaring out of the lot, they hoped distance and darkness might provide insulation from the nightmare that had invaded their simple errand. But halfway home on the freeway, a familiar vehicle dropped in behind them, keeping pace in the slow lane. A sinking dread overtook the minivan's occupants as phones were drawn hastily to capture the stalker's plates and call for help. Still, the man tailed close, merely lifting a hand in casual salute when spotted. By some miracle, traffic gradually compressed their pursuer from view, but it was little comfort knowing there was no escaping his disturbing presence entirely, at least not yet. Pulling into their neighborhood under cover of night did nothing to lift the palpable sense of lurking menace that now encroached upon the family's former sanctuary. The store was moderately busy as families finished weekend prep. Barbara steered their cart down the first few aisles, grabbing staples and tossing them in. Emma hovered nearby, hoping for a chance to help. Michael trailed behind, eyes glazed from a week spent behind a computer screen. A peculiar man lingered at the end of their aisle, observing the family with an intense focus. His overly large sunglasses obscured most of his face, reflecting the harsh LED lights above. Something about his demeanor set Barbara on edge, though she tried not to overreact. Still, she quickened their pace, nudging Emma along. The man followed discreetly as they moved to the next aisle over. Emma clamored for a treat, pulling her parents' attention momentarily. When Barbara glanced back over her shoulder, the man had closed the distance, now only a few cart lengths behind. He smirked oddly at being noticed, cocking his head in an almost predatory way. "That man has been behind us the whole time. I don't like the way he's staring," Barbara whispered nervously to Michael. He peered back, catching a glimpse before the man abruptly turned away, feigning interest in shampoo bottles. "Keep your eyes down, honey. Don't look at him," Michael told Emma gently but firmly. He tried to steer them to the front of the store, hoping the crowds might deter the creeper from following any further. But no matter how briskly they moved, the man's lumbering gait kept pace, never letting more than a few bodies come between them. They doubled back down another aisle, hoping to lose him in the maze of products. Barbara hurriedly tossed items in, growing more anxious by the second. From the corner of her eye, she saw the man grab a box from the very top shelf, putting on a show of struggling to reach in an attempt to close distance again. An involuntary shudder passed through her. Emma picked up on her mother's unease. "Daddy, that man is scaring Mommy. Can we please leave?" she asked timidly. Michael grit his teeth, fighting back a rising tide of protective frustration. They were so close to finishing. But he couldn't stand by and let this escalate further. "All right, I'm paying for this now, even if it's not all on the list. We're getting out of here," he announced with calm finality. Scooping up Emma, he pushed the cart briskly to the front. Barbara followed close behind, glancing back only once to see the man grinning oddly from the end of the aisle, his arms now crossed as he appeared to settle in for the long haul. Darkness offered no relief from the lingering terror that gripped the Johnson family. They pulled into the driveway with heightened alertness, scanning every shadow for signs of the stalker. Barbara ushered Emma inside with quivering hands, while Michael fetched their groceries briskly. After locking up, he conducted a room-by-room sweep with a baseball bat clutched ready. But the house appeared untouched, as yet undisturbed by the malevolent presence pursuing them. In the kitchen, Barbara grasped Emma tightly while dialing 911 with a trembling finger. Through tears, she recounted their harrowing experience to the dispatcher, pleading for police intervention. Help was on the way, she was assured, though unknown minutes might pass before a patrol arrived. The family waited anxiously in the dim light of the living room, jumping at small noises. Suddenly, brights flashed across the window as a vehicle rolled slowly past outside. Michael crept to the curtain, catching a glimpse of their stalker's car idling at the curb before accelerating away. His growl of frustration was barely contained, met with gasps of fresh alarm from the women. They couldn't stay trapped here, awaiting the next scare. Grabbing only essentials, Michael hurried them back out into the night, intent on finding refuge elsewhere until the police could be located. But no sooner had they pulled away than headlights appeared behind once more. Their pursuer dogged each turn taken, adapting effortlessly to evasive maneuvers. Desperation rose in Michael as he tried losing the tail on winding side streets to no avail. The stalker's night vision lenses granted an eerie accuracy, preventing escape by conventional means. A barrage of options flashed through his mind, each more desperate than the last. Finally, a plan took shape. Risky, but it may distract long enough to break free if executed flawlessly. Up ahead, a maintenance depot sat dark alongside the road. Slowing to allow their shadow to close the gap, Michael gunned it suddenly into the lot, weaving between machines and piles of debris. The stalker followed blindly at high speed, caught unaware as his path exploded with obstacles in the limited light. The crunch of impact shook the night, followed by an enraged howl as their pursuer recognized the ruse. But valuable seconds had been gained, enough for the minivan to peel backward out onto the road unimpeded. With a hard left, they rocketed toward the glare of city lights, abandoning darkness and the malevolent force trapped within. For now, they had evaded the immediate danger. But its master's twisted fascination remained unslaked, and safety remained precariously out of reach until his intentions could be unmasked and stopped once and for all. The hunt was far from over. Weaving through back roads, the Johnsons fled deeper into the city under cover of night. But their pursuer's blood was up, and he'd emerged from the crash still crazed with violent intent, patiently stalking side streets. His lenses soon caught sight of quarry again, a few miles ahead. With renewed purpose, he slowed pursuit, content now to follow discreetly until opportunity arose. Meanwhile, the family reached an older neighborhood near the downtown core. Exhausted and distraught, they parked beneath a lamp to gather bearings. Michael checked his phone desperately, despairing at the lack of messages from police. Just then, a crunch of tires alerted them to danger, closing in once more. There, before the light, their stalker idled, grinning with anticipation. Flight was no longer an option. They'd have to face this nightmare head-on. "Get back now, or things will go badly for you," Michael warned, brandishing the bat as he exited the van. But the man merely chuckled, emerging unfazed. "We were having such fun. Don't you want to play some more?" he crooned. Advancing slowly, Barbara saw her chance. Revving the engine, she slammed into reverse and peeled toward the man, tires squealing. He leapt aside barely in time, outraged by this audacity. Now off balance, Michael rushed forward to grab the bat from his hands. A vicious struggle ensued in the shadows as Barbara raced to dial 911 again through tears of anguish. Behind her, Emma watched in mute horror, wishing only for this terror to end. Inside the van, a small voice chirped. The man had left his phone on the seat in his haste. As the two men grappled, Michael spotted the device lighting up with texts. Seizing an opening, he tore free and scooped it up, illuminating the stalker's leering face for all to see in the glow. His eyes widened with alarm at being exposed at last. But retribution would not be so easily evaded. In the distance, wailing sirens grew nearer as the dispatcher had traced their location. Cornered now, the stalker's demeanor shifted to menace once more. "You think you've won?" he snarled, lunging forward with fingers outstretched toward Barbara at the wheel. But Michael was ready, bringing the bat down hard across his arm with a sickening crack. The man crumpled with an unearthly howl as police cruisers pulled up, lights blazing. At last, the threat was neutralized, and help had arrived. Though trauma lingered, the family took solace knowing they had prevailed through courage and quick thinking where others may have faltered. Their bravery in facing darkness would inspire light for many nights to come. The cool autumn evening greeted Emily Smith as she stepped outside the escape room experience with her family. Although only 11 years old, she had proven quite adept at solving puzzles and riddles alongside her parents. "Did you see how fast I found that hidden key?" she asked excitedly. "I think I'm finally getting as good as you guys." Her mother, Laura, smiled. "You're improving quicker than I expected. Next time, you might even beat your old man and me." Emily beamed at the praise, while her father, Jason, feigned offense. "Now, don't go getting a big head. We still had the final escape in the bag before you." His gentle teasing elicited giggles from Emily and Laura. As they walked towards the parking lot, Emily's attention wandered to the scattering of vehicles in the dimly lit area. Most had already cleared out after finishing their sessions. One vehicle in particular caught her eye, a nondescript silver sedan idling by the fence with its lights off. She watched as a lone figure sat silently inside and shivered involuntarily when meeting the shadowy stare of the solitary driver. "Everything all right, sweetie?" Laura rubbed her arms, mistaking the chill for the evening air. Emily glanced again at the car. Its occupant hadn't moved, only followed her movements with an unbroken gaze. "That man over there is watching us funny." Jason immediately went on alert, squinting into the dark. "Which car?" She pointed out the sedan, but it had already started rolling forward at a measured pace to tail their own vehicle in the lot. Its tinted windows obscured any view of the driver. "I don't like the look of this." Jason's brow furrowed with unease as he ushered his girls into their SUV. The sedan idled a few rows behind, still shadowy and inscrutable. He started the engine and pulled out, keeping an eye on the rearview mirror. Sure enough, the stranger trailed only a couple car lengths back, as if reluctant to lose sight of them. "He's following us, Dad," whispered Emily from the back seat. Jason met Laura's concerned gaze. I know, honey, but don't you worry, your old man won't let anything happen to you or Mom. He turned onto the main road, accelerating in hopes of shaking their mysterious tail. Unfortunately, the sedan maintained pursuit, sticking to them like a shadow on the darkened country lanes leading home. The family had long grown used to the peace and privacy rural living afforded, taking the back roads out of familiarity. But tonight, the isolation only heightened their unease regarding the persistent vehicle at their heels. Jason ran through scenarios in his mind, gripping the steering wheel till his knuckles whitened. The man showed no signs of stopping his fixation, even as dusk melted into nightfall beneath the waxing moon. Emily peered out the rear window, biting her lip worriedly. Laura did her best to soothe her daughter's nervousness, fighting her own rising alarm. "It's all right, honey. Your father won't let any harm come to us, I promise." Though her words reassured Emily, Jason could hear the strain in her voice. His blood boiled at the sinister implications of being stalked under cover of darkness. Somewhere deep in the woods, a lone owl hooted, one of nature's voices breaking the deathly stillness that had fallen. Breaking the silence, he said aloud, "I'm pulling over. It's time we got some answers from this guy." Laura nodded grimly, equally determined to put an end to the cat and mouse chase. Emily watched out the rear as Jason steered onto the shoulder and exited the vehicle. Her father seldom lost his calm, easygoing demeanor. But tonight, a steely glint had entered his eyes that frightened even her. She fervently hoped this would end peacefully, and their stalker would prove no real threat after all. But peering into the depths of that shadowy sedan, Emily could not help the nameless dread seeping into her heart. The sedan rolled to a halt a short distance behind them, tires crunching on the roadside gravel. Jason strode purposefully to its driver's side window, rapping commandingly on the glass. "Evening, fella. Mind telling me what your business is, following my family down back roads in the middle of the night?" The window glided down with an electrical hum, revealing a nondescript man of average build. Shadows obscured most of his face, but twin pinpricks of light glimmered back from behind round spectacles perched on his nose. "Apologies. I didn't mean to alarm anyone," he replied in a mild manner. "I was heading into town and seemed to have lost my way on these winding lanes. When I noticed your vehicle up ahead, I decided to trail at a safe distance rather than risk getting more turned around in the dark." Jason narrowed his eyes skeptically. "Funny, most folks in these parts know the roads like the back of their hands, and I don't recall seeing your car about town before." The man shrugged. "I'm just passing through on my way east. Must have taken a wrong turn after dusk fell." From her seat, Emily studied the man warily. She didn't like the way his glasses flashed ominously, obscuring his eyes. An unwelcome shiver crawled up her spine at his seemingly innocent yet rehearsed responses. Even so, following so close all this while couldn't have been a coincidence. Jason pressed, dissatisfied with the flimsy explanation. His imposing frame filled the driver's side window as he glared down at the meek stranger. "You got it to prove who you say you are." At that, the man flinched almost imperceptibly. A beat passed before he reached nonchalantly into an inner jacket pocket, drawing out a worn leather wallet. "My driver's license should clear things up, I assure you." He produced the card and handed it over, keeping a vice-like grip till the very last second as Jason tugged it free. Stepping back to the SUV for better lighting, Jason and Laura scrutinized the proffered identification under the ceiling lamp. Their brows furrowed further. Either something was off about the license that failed to add up, or the photo did not match the face of the man in the car. When Jason spun around to confront him again, the vehicle had vanished. In its place, twin beams of light flashed through the woods as tires squealed away at breakneck speed down the lane. Jason sprinted to their SUV and started the engine, throwing it into gear. "That son of a bitch just fled. Hold on, everyone. We're in pursuit. With a jolt, their vehicle sped off in chase of the escaping sedan. Emily squeaked and grabbed hold of the front headrests for support, as Laura braced a steadying arm. "Jason, slow down. We don't know what he's capable of." But he was deaf to reason, gaze affixed sternly ahead on the receding taillights, weaving recklessly through the trees. "I'm not letting that creep get away. Not after putting us through this scare. Strap in tight, ladies. It's pedal to the metal from here." He swerved around lumbering turns as the maniacal chase progressed deeper into the forest. Emily swallowed back whimpers, clenching her eyes shut from the dizzying sights whipping past. Laura prayed fervently their cat and mouse would end safely. Up ahead, the sedan fishtailed another corner, sliding past gnarled trunks at breakneck velocities. No normal driver would dare attempt. Jason redoubled pursuit with equal fervor, refusing to be shaken off. His smoldering wrath at their stalker had reached a boiling point. The trees began thinning as they ascended higher ground. Through the thinning woods, Emily spied the faintest glimmer of moonlight reflecting off a wide expanse in the distance. A vast quarry pit, long abandoned and left to reclaim by surrounding wilderness. A dead end for their quarry, if he was unwise enough to lead them there. Sure enough, the sedan broke from cover of trees onto an earthen road, hugged one edge of the looming drop-off. With a final kick of speed, Jason closed the remaining distance, parallel to the other car now. The sedan swerved perilously close to the quarry's sheer cliff, kicking up gravel behind its shrieking tires. Jason followed suit, nudging his own vehicle nearer in an aggressive bid to force the man to halt. Through her closed eyelids, Emily sensed the bone-rattling vibrations as their SUV jostled over the rough road. Risking a peek, she blanched at the dizzying heights falling away outside her windows into Stygian darkness below. One wrong move from either driver would mean plummeting over the edge to certain destruction. Laura shot a beseeching look at her husband. "Jason, please, back off before this madness gets us killed." He glowered ahead, determinedly. "Not until I get some answers." Honorable with a final lunge, Jason rammed the rear quarter of the sedan, sending it spinning out of control towards the precipice. For an instant, two sets of brake lights blazed crimson against the cliffside as both cars fishtailed violently to a halt, mere inches from the lip. In the ensuing stillness, all that could be heard were the labored pants of their stalker inside the teetering vehicle. Jason threw open his door and stalked towards the stranded sedan, sidearm drawn and ready. "Drop your keys out the window now, before I give you a reason." The man complied wordlessly, ejecting a lone keyring which pinged off the road ahead. Emerging with hands raised, he faced Jason's wrathful aim with a maddening calm. "Well played, my friend. You've bested me in our little chase. But I wonder, do you really want to find out why I've taken such an interest in your charming family?" From the corner of his vision, Jason spied movement within the tree line. Two hulking silhouettes emerged to flank their immobilized sedan, brandishing sinister implements that glinted bone, chillingly in the starlight. His blood ran cold as icy comprehension dawned. It had all been a ruse, to lead them into an ambush under cover of darkness, far from any help or witness. Their stalker smiled thinly, spectacles twinkling with cruel mirth. "Now, if you'll be so kind as to lower that pistol, we can have ourselves a civil conversation." His goons closed in from both sides, confident in their numbers. Jason found himself aimed upon from multiple barrels, with no shot but to relinquish his sole means of defense. He tossed the sidearm angrily aside with a clatter. "You sick bastard. All this just to corner a family out in the middle of nowhere. What the hell do you want from us?" The man cocked his head, regarding them almost pityingly through his lenses. "Why? It's quite simple, really. You see, my associates and I have been, how do I phrase this delicately? Recruiting, shall we say, for our cause. and your darling little girl strikes me as prime recruit material." Emily whimpered and shrank back from his roving gaze, fear constricting her tiny form. Laura pulled her protectively into her arms, defiance blazing fiercely despite tears brimming her eyes. "You'll have to kill us first before touching a hair on her head." A snarl curled the man's lips, finally revealing his true monstrous nature. "So be it. Boys, if they insist on being difficult, I don't see why we can't. Convince them to see things our way." At his word, the hulking figures advanced on the SUV, brandishing a tire iron and thick chain respectively. Jason leapt to intercept, only to receive a meaty backhand across his jaw, sending him reeling. Through a haze, he watched helplessly as the chain-wielding assailant yanked Laura and Emily from the vehicle, dragging them both kicking and screaming towards the tree line. "No! Get your filthy paws off my family, you son of a bitch!" His enraged bellow shattered the night, desperate and primal. Summoning his last reserves, Jason launched himself with a roar at the smirking leader blocking his path to rescue his girls. Fists and feet flew in a savage brawl as the quarry echoed with the screams of loved ones, vanishing into the merciless wood. The looming walls of elm and oak swallowed Laura and Emily's struggles whole, muffling their cries for help. Splintering tree trunks spun dizzyingly past as the hulking brute hauled them deeper into the forest primeval. Laura wrestled with iron hands, clawing viciously at her daughter. She would be damned before surrendering Emily to these monsters. With a primal yell, she lunged teeth, first at the brute's meaty forearms, sinking her incisors into rough flesh. He howled, rearing back to clutch his wounded limb. In that instant, Laura snatched Emily up and bolted blindly into the inkiness. Branches whipped and snagged at their flight, but the promise of rescue buoyed their escape. Behind, crashed the brute's infuriated pursuit, his heavy footfalls gaining with each passing moment. They couldn't outrun him forever in the choking maze of trees. A glint of moonlight ahead, the quarry's edge loomed. Without pause, Laura charged into the clearing, skidding to a desperate halt at the sheer precipice, trapped between the cliff and their approaching captor. "Stay back or I jump!" she roared, backing towards the drop. Emily clung to her mother in terror, tears streaming. The hulking form emerged from shadow, eyes alight with savage hunger. Without hesitation, he lunged. Laura leapt just in time, feeling enormous hands grasp only air. Gravity took hold as she and Emily fell into the inky void, clutching each other for the long plunge into darkness below. The drop seemed an eternity. At the last instant, Laura twisted, taking the brunt of impact upon jagged boulders deep within the abandoned pit. Pain lanced through her like white-hot knives. Beside her lay Emily, dazed but miraculously unharmed. Footsteps crunched the quarry's edge above. A towering silhouette peered down upon its trapped prey, lip curling in a feral sneer. It raised a meaty fist, ready to finish the gruesome task. A savage war cry rent the night. From the shadows, Jason exploded, unleashing every ounce of vengeance upon the hulking brute. Fists, feet, and teeth became a blur of motion. This beast would die for threatening his family. The two titans thundered across the clearing in a lethal dance. Blows rained with punishing force, breaking flesh and shattering bone. Finally, Jason landed a crushing haymaker, stovepiping the brute's skull with an audible crack. It crumpled, lifeless to the dirt. But his triumph was short-lived as the sinister leader stalked into view, calmly buttoning his cuffs. "My, you have been a waste of effort," he sighed, adjusting his glasses calmly. "No matter. I have other candidates waiting who won't require so. Persuasion. A pity your girl had to witness this uncivilized display." Jason snarled, rising slowly on battered limbs. This monster would find no easy escape after the hell unleashed this night. As the man turned to leave, Jason launched one last attack. A scrap of fallen chain lay coiled at his feet. Swinging with every ounce of his wrecked body, the lynx caught the man around his neck with a meaty thwack. He choked, scrabbling desperately at the tightening noose as Jason wrenched with staggering strength. With an emulated crack, the chain jerked taut, snapping the man's neck instantly. His broken body crumpled at Jason's feet. It was over. Exhausted beyond measure, Jason collapsed beside the still forms of his wife and child. Through the pain and adrenaline's fog, he saw Laura's tired smile and Emily's small fingers clinging to his own. As dawn's first rays crested the tree line, 3 survivors held each other closely. They had prevailed against the darkness through perseverance and love's incredible strength. Yet in the wood's cold recesses, evil surely slumbered still, patiently awaiting its next opportunity. The evening was dragging on sluggishly as Bryan sat out on the front porch with Jessica and Drew, passing around a cheap cigar they had swiped from Drew's older brother. While most nights were spent escaping into the anonymity of downtown or crowded house parties, tonight had been more subdued. His mother had been working extra hours at the hospital, and his father was away on yet another business trip, leaving the old house feeling emptier than usual. As the sun dipped below the towering oak trees that lined the street, Bryan found himself gazing out into the gathering dusk with an uneasy feeling settling over him. Something about the thickening shadows stretching between the neighboring homes felt surreal and unsettling. He wondered if it was just the stale remnants of boredom taking root, or if something more was awakening some primal sense of unease deep in his subconscious. The sharp crack of a branch snapping into the darkness jolted him from his thoughts. "What was that?" Jessica whispered, her fingers gripping his arm a little tighter. Across from them, Drew scanned the rim of the porch intently, squinting into the darkness between the porch light's feeble glow. Another sound followed, this one closer, a shuffling, dragging noise somewhere out in the unkempt lawn. Bryan rose slowly, motioning for his friends to stay low as he crept to the railing and peered out into the darkening yard. At first, he saw only restless shadows swaying in the breeze, but then a figure emerged, staggering out from behind a large oak with tangled branches grasping at its clothes. The man was gaunt and disheveled, his clothes hanging loose from a bony frame. Stringy hair fell across a haggard, bruised face, locked in a grimace. As he dragged one foot awkwardly behind him, his wild eyes flickered around erratically until fixing on the 3 frozen figures watching from the porch. A low, guttural moan escaped his cracked lips as he took an unsteady step forward, reaching out a gnarled hand towards them. "Hey, everything all right, man?" Drew called out warily, inching up beside Bryan. The man cocked his head, brows furrowing as if just now noticing them clearly. After several uneasy moments, he took another lumbering step and opened his mouth as if to reply. All that emerged was an incoherent spluttering, spittle flying from his dirt-caked lips. Without warning, he lurched forward violently, limping faster towards the porch with alarming speed. Jessica let out a yelp as Bryan and Drew leapt down the steps, putting distance between them and the railing. The man dropped to his knees amidst the overgrown shrubs below, keening noises rippling from his throat. After several minutes of unnerving howls and grunts, he suddenly fell still and silent. When no further movements followed, Bryan crept back towards the railing, peering down with dread. To his surprise and unease, the man was nowhere to be seen. Only disturbed leaf litter and broken branches marked where he had collapsed, as if swallowed whole by the encroaching night. Jessica tugged at his arm, her eyes wide with terror. "Bryan, let's go inside, please." He nodded numbly, swallowing down the acrid tang of fear rising in his throat, and followed his friends into the stifling confines of the old house, locking the heavy front door securely behind them. As each found excuses to linger in different rooms, an uneasy silence fell over the home, broken only by phantom noises that refused to release their grip on Bryan's imagination. Something told him this bizarre encounter was only the beginning of something far more unsettling, creeping towards them, out of the dark. Bryan awoke with a start, confusion and dread clawing their way to the surface of his murky dreams. He stared into the suffocating dark, heart hammering as faint sounds drifted up from downstairs. Shuffling, scraping. Something was moving down there. Gripping his baseball bat tightly, he crept to Jessica's room and shook her awake. "Jess, there's someone in the house," he whispered urgently. Her eyes flew open and she stifled a scream, hands flying to her mouth. "Quick, call the police," Bryan hissed, passing her his phone before continuing downstairs with trepidation pooling in his stomach. As he descended step by step, the noises grew clearer. Furniture being jostled, drawers being rummaged through violently. A shadow moved at the edge of the dining room, illuminated by street lamps filtering through broken glass strewn across hardwood floors. Gripping the bat with sweat, slicked palms, Bryan rounded the corner and froze. It was him, the derelict man from the yard, pawing through cabinets with bloodied knuckles. At the sound of Bryan's approach, he whirled, baring stained teeth in a feral snarl. In his grasp was a wickedly sharp kitchen knife, glinting menacingly. You did this to me," the man rasped, eyes bulging maniacally. "He made me this. It's your fault." Before Bryan could react, he lunged with a guttural shriek. Ducking right, Bryan swung with all his might, connecting with a sickening crunch. The man careened into a table with a howl, knife skittering across the floor out of reach. He rose unsteadily, limbs twitching as if electrified, and launched at Bryan again like a rabid animal. They crashed to the hardwood in a tangle of flailing limbs, the man's cold hands finding Bryan's throat in a vice grip. Spots swam before his vision as he desperately grappled for purchase, claws scrabbling against the man's gaunt frame to no avail. Through the roaring in his ears, Bryan heard pounding footsteps on the stairs and saw a dark shape barreling towards them. With a wordless battle cry, Drew plowed into the heap, fists flying wildly until the stranglehold loosened. Bryan broke free, gasping for air as Jessica descended, screaming into the melee. With Drew's aid, Bryan managed to pin the man's bones down, holding him thrashing and foaming at the mouth until sirens pierced the air outside. Police poured through the shattered window ledge, taking in the scene with stunned expressions before wrenching the deranged man into cuffs. As he was dragged howling away, Bryan collapsed back, chest heaving, blood and sweat mingling on his skin. The aftermath was a blur. Officers questioning them urgently as paramedics arrived, Jessica clinging to Bryan's shirt as her fearful ramblings dissolved into tears. Only snippets stuck out clearly. The man's name was Martin Brooks, recently evicted and known to police for petty crimes and unstable behavior. He kept muttering about making things right. It's their fault. They need to pay. Days passed in a state of constant vigilance. Neither Bryan nor his friends sleeping soundly. At school, worried whispers and glances followed them. Rumors of the home invasion spreading. Bryan struggled to focus, replaying each moment of the attacks obsessively as the trial date drew nearer. One afternoon, while walking home alone, a car pulled up alongside him with tinted windows. A man leaned over, asking if he needed a ride, and Bryan broke into a run as a familiar croak echoed from the passenger seat. "You." He dashed inside and slammed the bolt home, collapsing against the door as hysterical giggles and cries battled within for control. Upstairs, a fluttering shadow passed behind dusty curtains, and Bryan knew without a doubt the nightmare was only beginning. The days crawled by under a pall of constant fear and dread for Bryan and his friends. They steered clear of anywhere remotely isolated, traveling in groups at all times with phones perpetually clutched in white-knuckled grips. At night, Bryan found little solace even within the confines of his home, as every creak and groan took on a sinister edge. When the day of Martin Brooks' psychiatric evaluation arrived, Bryan dragged himself warily to the courthouse with Jessica and Drew in tow. They took their seats amid stifling silence, staring fixedly at the defendant's entrance while ignoring concerned glances from onlookers. Finally, the heavy door swung open and two bailiffs escorted in a hunched figure, shuffling manacled feet beneath an oversized orange jumpsuit. Bryan recoiled in horror. While gaunt before, Martin now seemed a mere skeleton, pale skin clinging skull-like over jutting cheekbones. Deep bruises ringed sunken eyes, which roved wildly until fixing on them with a murderous gleam. As the evaluation progressed, Martin uttered only disjointed ravings, spittle flying from chapped lips which curled back Pharrell-like over rotting teeth. When pressed on motives, he began shrieking about evictions and ruined lives, spasming so violently the bailiffs had to forcibly subdue him. The judge deemed him too mentally degraded to stand trial, ordering an indefinite hold at the state psychiatric facility. After, Bryan slumped numbly outside, clutching his midsection as nausea overwhelmed him. That man was barely human anymore, consumed by delusions and madness. What had they unleashed? Jessica laid a gentle hand on his arm, tears streaming down blotchy cheeks. "Bryan, I'm so scared. We need to find out more," he finally rasped, straightening with new resolve burning in his eyes. That evening, Bryan searched public records deep into the night, scouring for any connections between Martin and his father. Finally, tucked away in a decade-old rent dispute case file, a name leapt out. Martin Brooks, V's. Robert Hamilton. Reading further, Bryan felt the blood drain from his face. His father had presided over Martin's eviction from subsidized housing years ago, due to non-payment and disorderly conduct complaints. The next morning, Bryan confronted his father, now home briefly between conferences. As he recounted their ordeal and his discoveries, Robert paled visibly, slowly lowering himself into an armchair. "My boy, I had no idea. The man was clearly unwell, but I had no choice under the statute. I am so sorry you've been drawn into this madness," his father said gravely, resting a shaking hand over his eyes. "This wasn't just random," Bryan stated flatly. "Martin targeted us because of you. God knows what he'll do when he's released." His father sighed heavily, running a hand through graying hair. "I'll ensure he remains under close supervision and make amends however possible. But for now, please be vigilant. It seems this nightmare is only just beginning." Bryan stepped shakily out of the grand courthouse, Jessica's hand anchoring him to reality as the last echoing gavel strike faded. It was finally over. Martin Brooks had been sentenced to indefinite incarceration at a high-security facility due to the severity of his offenses and deteriorated mental state. While relief flooded through him, an undercurrent of uncertainty remained. Could they truly feel safe with that maniac locked away, consuming himself with delusions of revenge? Bryan knew all too well that madness cared little for bars or bolts when obsession took hold. Weeks passed in a surreal state of limbo for Bryan and his friends. On one hand, a semblance of normalcy returned as wounds scabbed over, and nightmares grew rarer. Laughter and careless youth slowly reasserted themselves, on afternoons spent distracting each other from growing pains. Yet in quieter moments, uncertainty crept back in through cracks in facade. Bryan found himself gazing into lengthening shadows as dusk fell more frequently, tracing patterns in escaping daylight for perceived dangers. More than once, he startled violently at phantom touches or sounds, heart leaping toward his throat before logic could intervene. His parents noticed too. Extra patrols were arranged, top-of-the-line security installed, and concerned queries into his well-being became a daily occurrence. While meant as comfort, the fuss only reinforced Bryan's unease. Was he truly helpless against unseen terrors, dependent on locks and walls for even an illusion of control over his domain? One chill autumn evening, as Bryan was returning home late from the library, a vibration from his phone startled him. An unknown number flashed on the screen beneath a heavily blurred profile photo. Against his better judgment, he accepted the call, immediately violent. Incoherent shrieks assaulted his ears. In a moment of pure instinct, Bryan ended the call and broke into a dead sprint, phone tumbling from numb fingers. Dark forms seemed to materialize from every shadow, clinging hands grasping for purchase as unfamiliar laughter echoed all around. He careened through the front door and collapsed against it, barricading it with everything nearby as hysterical howls shattered the night. Between fits of unchecked panic, Bryan contacted authorities with a trembling finger, relaying the untraceable call and ensuing apparitions flooding his periphery. Officers swiftly arrived to comb the property but found no intruders, only Bryan's fraying sanity clinging desperately to reality's edge. In the aftermath, Bryan's parents arranged for him to temporarily stay with relatives out of state, hoping distance and change of scenery might pull him back from that brink. As his train pulled away into the gathering dusk, Bryan gazed out at familiar landmarks receding into the gray. Though physically removed, remnants of that terrible ordeal had imprinted themselves upon his soul, a scar woven so deeply into his psyche that no passage of time could fully remove its invisible marks. Perhaps, as the last vestiges of home disappeared into twilight, some wounds were simply never meant to fully heal.